and the precautions taken to prevent it from happening again. But again, it's a tall order.
You can watch this online at cspan.org. The U.S. Senate earlier today approved by a vote of 68 to 31 to debate gun control legislation. We return you to the Senate floor now. They've been on a 2-hour recess. Waiting for senators to come to the floor, and we expect to resume debate on gun control legislation. While this quorum call continues, we're able to take you back live to Leader Pelosi's briefing happening now.
Bill benefits, they won't be affected. The Supplemental Nutrition Program, SNAP, food stamps, and child nutrition programs will not be affected. Pell Grants will not be affected. And so it goes on and on to that effect. But again, it has to be weighed against compared to what and how else can we reach balance. I think coming out of this meeting, we will be better equipped to really know what the impact is of change CPI, the pros and cons of it. But I think there's more of an interest in viewing it as, if at all, just in terms of Social Security stability rather than balancing the budget. Yes.
Senator Mike Lee talked about the universal background checks could possibly lead to a federal registry on guns. Is that an unfounded concern on his part?
I don't see any. It's certainly not so in the president in the Senate bill, and it is the principles that we have put forward on the House side, which you've probably seen. We don't have a gun registry there.
Is that something that you would perhaps though fight against or for, or might not, as far as
well, we want to have a bill that the boldest common denominator that we can pass that reduces gun violence in our country. And we're waiting to see where the Senate moves. They'll have many amendments. I don't know if that will be one of them. I hope that when it comes to the House, we can have a vote. The American people deserve a vote. The American people want a vote in overwhelming numbers. Some of the things that are in the Senate bill are supported in overwhelming numbers, to repeat the phrase. So we'll see. But there's nothing, to get to your first point, that said this will lead to that. No, not necessarily.
Leader Pelosi,
yeah.
Speaker Boehner just said on guns that he would think before we add more rules and regulations, our law enforcement personnel and DOJ should enforce the current law, which they're not doing. Do you have a reaction to that statement?
It saddens me because obviously we should enforce the laws that we have. There's no question about that, and many of us have said that over and over again. The most recent Supreme Court decision on guns recognizes that there is a role to be played to regulate, if that's the word, guns, the Heller decision relating to the District of Columbia. But that is not enough. That is not enough. I don't know how we can show our faces to these families or even look ourselves in the mirror if we don't take something more serious. As I've said to you over and over, any one of us as members of Congress, Democratic, Republican, anybody, would stand in front of an assault on our children to protect them from any attack. We should have the political courage to stand out there to protect them from gun violence as well. And more needs to be done in a reasoned way where we can reach as I say, the boldest common denominator, consensus, and start there and go from there. Yes, sir.
Madam Leader, I wanted to ask you what you thought about the NRA's power and what's their status like these days. We saw that, they weren't able to really have a strong effect with blocking today's procedural vote, but they have been successful in, thwarting an assault weapons ban or a ban on capacity clips. So, I'm wondering kind of what you think about where they are.
Well, we haven't seen the votes on that and any amendments on the Senate floor yet. I believe that Senator Feinstein is still is determined to put forth an assault weapon ban, and others may be putting forth a high-capacity magazine ban. It takes 60 votes to get an amendment heard, my understanding is. I thought we got through that today, but I guess on every amendment you need a 60-vote threshold, so that will be difficult. What do you mean by NRA? If you're talking about the membership of the NRA...
Do you think that their power is diminished here in Capitol Hill?
Well, I don't... the members of the NRA, with whom many of us share many... are in agreement on many subjects, including their the Second Amendment, their respecting their rights as gun owners and hunters and the rest. Many of the NRA members support background checks. You know the statistics. You've seen the polls. So the membership seems to be way ahead of the leadership of the NRA on these issues. It remains to be seen at the end of the day whether they can stand in the way of a vote to reduce gun violence in our country. I hope that they do not. The gun owners of America, that's a whole other story. Their advocacy, their radical positions that they take may have an impact on the positions that the NRA takes. I'm not an expert on that the dynamic of anti-gun safety leadership in these organizations, but I respect the concerns that members have about how they will be affected, being gun owners, being hunters, using guns for recreational use. That's why I was pleased to appoint Mike Thompson to the head of our task force. He's a Vietnam War vet, a wounded Vietnam War vet, a person who has used assault weapons in combat and knows that they should be banned. But nonetheless, is that a place where all of Congress can come to agreement? I don't know. But he certainly is a gun owner and a hunter and brings that perspective to the table to lead our efforts to find common ground. We'll see what the impact is. I don't want to predict that it's going to be successful because I hope and pray that it is not. And as you've heard me say over and over, President Lincoln said public sentiment is everything. And if the public, including members of the NRA, understand that more needs to be done, I think that we will be successful. One more? Yes, ma'am.
Going back to the President's budget for just a minute, I think it's something like more than 100 members of your caucus at this point have signed a letter saying that they won't vote for cuts to either Social Security or Medicare. We've heard a lot about how Republicans and their intransigence on taxes are blocking a deal. But do you think your caucus actually supports this kind of balanced compromise that the President is pushing so hard for at this point?
Well, again, I'll make a distinction here. When we talk about I think everyone in our caucus, and I would hope everyone in the Congress, but I do not really believe it is true, everyone in the Congress, because there are those who think that Social Security has no place in a free society. They've introduced legislation to privatize it and continue to do so. But let's just say most people in our country want to see Social Security sustained, strengthened, and its solvency extended. What are the options that are available to do that? Let's put that on this table called the Social Security table. It's on the table to prolong its life, to have the insurance that it is. It's an insurance policy. People have paid in. People will receive funds out. We have to face the demographic reality of many more baby boomers coming online, and how do we, again, strengthen Social Security. What our members are concerned about is mixing that with the budget. There's no reason why you should say we've got to slow the growth of Social Security benefits in order to reduce the deficit. No, we can reduce the deficit by having people in the high incomes pay their fair share. We can reduce the deficit by cutting spending, and that includes tax expenditures. We spend hundreds of billions of dollars unnecessarily giving tax loopholes, subsidies, and the rest to those who don't need them. There are some subjects like deduction of interest on mortgages that are legitimate tax expenditures, but not these others that are just a tax avoidance on the part of some. So, and that's in the tunes of hundreds of billions. So why are we talking about something over here in relationship to what we need to do now? The president, I believe, has said to the Republicans, okay, you want to see something in the area of Social Security and Medicare. These are only on the table if we're talking about serious revenue. Only on the table if we're talking about serious revenue coming in, additional revenue. So far, we haven't seen the response to that, but I'm certain it will be. I don't know, maybe the Speaker said something to you this morning, earlier this afternoon, about that.
If he delivered, would your side come around on the entitlement?
Well, let's see what they do. Let's see what they do. We respect the president. He chose to put it in the budget to give it that visibility, but it might have a more useful place to be discussed on its own table on Social Security, where you can compare one thing or another, one option or another. But we have to learn more about it. I don't know about you, but do you feel comfortable talking about change CPI? Do you know all of the ramifications of it? To the extent that you have an appreciation for what it does and what it does not do. And that's what we want members to do. It should be a decision. It should not be, an emotion. And I myself, I say you have to prove to us that this is worth it, because it affects many other things. It's not just about Social Security and the rate of increase of a Social Security benefit, which it would slow down in some cases, or if you're very poor, it might speed up. But it's about other parts of our economy that are that grow at the rate of inflation that would no longer do that. So if wages, for example, are rising to the rate of inflation and benefits are going at the CPI, then you have, there's some answers we need for how fast one side of this grows versus the other, and has implications in the tax code as to whether somebody gets bumped into a higher bracket from a 15% bracket to a 25% bracket because of the way wages were measured versus other aspects of our of personal accounting for the American people. So it's an interesting time. I find it interesting. I love to learn, don't you? And we will see, we'll learn several things. We'll learn what this actually does. We'll learn compared to what, and why it should even be considered in a budget when it could be considered someplace else on a separate table. But again, I think everybody has the right to express themselves on this. I'm not making any judgment about the president putting it in or our members saying they want it to be taken out, and some have written to that effect, as you mentioned. But what I do want, and what we're finally getting today, and it was only because of scheduling of the experts that we want it to come in, that it is today, but it coincides perfectly with the president's budget, that we will get some of the facts on it. It may strengthen people's position against it. It may add more people against it, but at least we will have more knowledge about what it is. But I'll tell you, for a phrase that most people had never heard of before, most people had never heard of in the general public, it really developed a life now, didn't it? Now let's see if we can get the facts on it. It'll be interesting to see. And what the fact is, if the Republicans aren't going to come forth with any revenue, what's the discussion? It's a discussion for another day soon where we talk about preserving Social Security and Medicare. It's an interesting time. Today we had a really beautiful ceremony. It was the Day of Remembrance of the Holocaust, and it was in the rotunda. If you've never seen it, you should go next year, because they had the flags come in of all of the units that freed the people in Auschwitz. Well, you know, along many camps. And it was just stunningly beautiful to recognize those units, and then also to see the survivors lighting the candles. I must say, when I've been to every one since I've been here. This is my 25th, because I came in June, my 25th time. And at the time I first came, I thought, geez, because they were doing this, these Holocaust survivors are really getting on, and it's a good thing we're doing it. Now it's 20 years later, and many of them are still there, very strong, lighting the candles and all the rest of it. But the most moving thing to see, just to remember what they saw and the description that is given of it, and how we must always remember. So at the beginning, there was no Holocaust Museum when I was first coming to these, and now the Holocaust Museum is 20 years old, and they sort of sponsor it now. It's really quite magnificent. So mark your calendar for 1 year from now in April to be sure and go and see the patriotism of our troops and the courage they had, and how great General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower was at the time, and how he really wanted to be sure that people saw the facts of it, so that it could never be denied and it could never happen again. So pretty eventful week. The President's budget, Paycheck Fairness Act, Equal Pay Day, President's budget, F for 100 days for the Republicans for their first 100 days. Next week when I see you, I'm going to talk to you about why this is so damaging, and how it's becoming entrenched if we don't put a stop to that. How job creation is so important, and not only job creation, but paying a decent wage to workers, and how over the past 25, 30 years, how the disparity in income has grown to such a huge amount as to undermine the middle class in our country. And what the Republicans are doing now just reinforces all of that. Our country is great. We can withstand a lot. We shouldn't have to have America's working families put up with this. And that's what we'll be talking about next week. Thank you all very much.
I come down to the floor for the second time today, and I think maybe the fifth time over the last 2 days, to talk again about the real reason that we're here on the floor of the United States Senate this week and next week, talking about the scourge of gun violence across this country, and it's the victims. We've had a good week this week on the floor of the United States Senate. A breakthrough on the matter of background checks, an agreement that we hope can forge the basis of a bill next week, an agreement that maybe doesn't move us as far as some of us would like in terms of making sure that criminals don't have guns in this country, but moves us very far down the line towards a day when no criminals can go onto the streets of this country with guns. And then a very positive vote today in which Democrats and Republicans joined together to break a threatened filibuster to get to the floor. But these are the kids that we're really here to talk about. And I know there's a colleague on the floor to seek recognition, but I wanted to come down before the week was over just to talk about a few more victims, just to make sure that we are really clear about who and what we're talking about here. Let me talk about a few more victims from Newtown. Let me tell you about Chase Kowalski, who was one of the 6- and 7-year-olds killed by the gunman's bullets in Sandy Hook Elementary School. He was an amazing little kid. He was an athlete, much like Jack Pinto, who I talked about yesterday. Chase was a young jock. He had actually completed and won a kids' triathlon in Mansfield, Connecticut. He was 6 years old, and he competed and won in a kids' triathlon. He was so inspired at watching the Olympics last summer, seeing his heroes, Michael Phelps and Ryan Lochte, do so well, that he went out and decided he was going to learn how to swim and try to do it competitively. And so he taught himself how to swim, 6 years old. And with a little bit of help, he went out and became a swimmer as well. His parents and his surviving 2 older sisters, in honor of Chase's love for sports, ran together, a lot of his friends and family did, ran together in a Sandy Hook 5K run that attracted thousands of people to the streets of Hartford. Chase Kowalski could have done a lot of things. He clearly had this drive and initiative that you don't find in a lot of kids that are only 7 years old. Chase was 7, excuse me. I may have said 6 when he died. He was 6 when he did that triathlon. We'll never really know who Chase was going to grow up to be, but he was a pretty remarkable young boy. Jesse Lewis, who's right here on this poster, his father is here this week, Neil Heslin, arguing, pleading for us to do something. Jesse was a pretty amazing kid in his own right. He was 6 years old, and the evening before the tragedy, he and his father had actually been out shopping for Christmas presents for his friends and family. And in fact, one of the gifts they were going out to get the night before was for his teacher, Vicky Soto, who was killed the next morning along with him. But Jesse was spending his own money on all these presents. He had $37 to spend, $37 that he had earned by helping his father with a variety of odd jobs. And that was Jesse. He wanted to do nice things for people, but he wanted to earn the right to do it. And so it wasn't the first time that he had gone out and basically earned the money at 6 years old in order to buy things. But he was still a kid. He grew up on a farm, and so he loved horses and dogs and chicks, and he liked to go out and fish and play soccer, and his dad was always outside working on projects, and he always wanted to be with his dad, Neil. He was a pretty amazing kid with a lot of initiative and drive for a 6-year-old, and we'll never really know who he was going to grow up to be either. But the reality is that I've talked about on this floor over the last 2 days, though so much of the attention is on those 20 kids, 3,300 people have died since Newtown, and that's where our focus should be as well, on people like Brian Herrera, who was 16 years old, a straight A student at Miami-Jackson Senior High School. And 3 days before Christmas of last year, this is only just about a week after the Newtown shootings, Brian was riding his bike to his best friend's house. He was going to visit with his friend to work on a school project. He was doing exactly what he should have done, going to a friend's house to work on a school project, and he was gunned down in broad daylight in the middle of the pavement. He was still carrying his red backpack, story we heard earlier today about someone else. This was just a totally random shooting, and police, I'm not sure if this has been solved at this point, but at the time the police had absolutely no idea why this had happened. But there are so many guns out on the streets today, many of them illegal guns, because we don't have a gun trafficking law and we don't have a good background checks law, that these things happen. Or somebody like Jeremy Lee Cahoon, 25 years old, shot in California just about a month ago. He was one of 5 brothers. His father had just lost his wife. He was a native of Stockton, California, an iron worker. He was always cheerful and smiling. Jeremy was killed by gun violence, and he left behind a 3-year-old son. A 3-year-old son. This is just in February of this year. Madam Speaker, every single day, 30 people in this country die from gun violence. You can't even see the differentiation between the little figurines in this chart because it happens so often. And I've been coming down to the floor not to hold time, but to just try to remind my colleagues here of who we're really talking about. And the fact that what we're proposing to do next week really will make a difference. You know, if you want to get all of these illegal guns off the street, then you can't just accept the status quo. You have to do something about it. It's ridiculous that we don't have a federal law that bans gun trafficking. It's not okay that perhaps 4 out of every 10 guns in this country are sold without background checks. You shouldn't be able to walk into a school or a movie theater or a church with a 100-round drum of ammunition. There's just no reason for it. We are not going to wipe gun violence off the face of this earth, but we've got to remember these victims. We've got to remember the Jeremys. We've got to remember the Jessies. We have to remember the Bryans and the Charlottes and the Madelines and all of these people who have lost their lives. We can't bring them back, but we can certainly make sure that 3 months from now, 4 months from now, this chart is a little bit smaller. We have the ability to do that, Madam President. And so I know there are other speakers on the floor who are seeking time today, and so I'll take my leave again. But I'll be back next week. I'll be back with other stories of victims from Connecticut to Colorado to Tucson to New York City to Chicago to Miami, so that as we move into maybe the most critical week on the floor of this body with respect to the debate on gun violence in decades, that we are really sure about who we're talking about and about the difference that we can make. I yield back the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Nebraska.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to speak on the budget proposal released at long last yesterday by President Obama. Tardy though this budget may be, and despite our differences in opinion, I welcome the President's ideas to begin addressing our nation's fiscal crisis and runaway spending. Unfortunately, though, I am disappointed that this budget amounts to more taxes, more spending, more debt. The President's budget calls for $1.1 trillion more in taxes. On top of the $660 billion in tax hikes, the President already demanded and won as part of the fiscal cliff deal enacted at the beginning of the year before I arrived in Washington. That's a grand total of $1.8 trillion in tax hikes, before we add in another $1 trillion tax from Obamacare. Yet despite all of this new so-called revenue, the President's budget would never balance. No amount of taxes will ever begin to address our nation's $17 trillion debt. But taxes aren't the only problem with the President's budget. There's also $1 trillion in new spending. We tried that in 2009. It didn't work then, and it won't work now. To spend more, we have to borrow more. The President's budget would add $8.2 trillion in new debt over the next 10 years. Of particular concern to farmers, ranchers, and small businesses in Nebraska is a proposed hike in the death tax. Under the fiscal cliff deal reached at the beginning of this year, the death tax was set at 40%, with an exemption per state of $5 million, indexed for inflation. This is already an increase from 2011 and 2012, when the death tax rate was 35%. The President's budget, however, would hike that rate further to 45%, while also diminishing the exemption per state to $3.5 million. This disregards the bipartisan will of Congress. The Senate has repeatedly supported a lower death rate and a higher exemption. Just 3 weeks ago, 80 senators, myself included, supported an amendment seeking to repeal or at least reduce the death tax. Instead, the President's death tax proposal would result in a $72 billion tax hike. This would be particularly harmful to family farmers and ranchers in my state of Nebraska and across our nation. On average, more than 80% of the value of a family-owned farm or ranch is derived from land, buildings, and equipment. Following the death of a loved one, families often must sell part or even all of their land or property to pay that death tax bill. Yet these are illiquid assets, which rarely receive their assessed value on the open market, leaving families to take cents on the dollar in order for them to keep that farm or ranch. Each day, farmers and ranchers across Nebraska and across this great country of ours rise well before dawn, only to retire well after dark. After building a successful enterprise, family farmers and ranchers should be able to pass along the fruits of their labor to their children. Instead, the President's budget proposal would reward this lifetime of hard work with a higher tax bill. I will proudly co-sponsor legislation to be introduced soon by Senator John Thune to permanently repeal the death tax. Absent a full repeal, I will continue fighting to ensure that family farmers, ranchers, and other small businesses escape as much of the brunt of the death tax as possible. This is not to say that I disagree with every aspect of the President's budget. Medicare and Social Security are both on the path to insolvency. I appreciate that the President sees this unsustainable path and has offered concrete proposals to reform these programs. Without action, seniors and beneficiaries will see steep cuts in benefits from Medicare by 2024 and Social Security by 2033. While these cuts will not come overnight, neither will the solutions we need to keep the promises we've made to our seniors and those nearing retirement. This is a first step in what will be, and quite frankly, what needs to be, a prolonged, well-reasoned debate. I look forward to working with the President in good faith to reform and save these critical programs. I also appreciate the President's desire for revenue-neutral corporate tax reform. The devil, of course, is in the details. I have great reservations that the President's proposal would basically redistribute tax preferences instead of doing more to bring down what is the highest corporate income tax rate in the world. And I believe that we should not merely do this on the corporate side, but reform our entire tax code on a revenue-neutral basis in order to unleash the economic growth of our country. These are areas where we can work together, and I am eager to do so. But higher taxes, higher spending, and higher debt are not the answer to the fiscal challenges that our nation faces. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to join other colleagues in thanking the senators who supported us in the vote earlier today. My profound thanks to all who voted among the 68 to enable this debate to go forward, to provide and permit for debate and votes in coming days, and to enable the families of Newtown to have a vote, to enable the victims of Tucson and Virginia Tech and Aurora and Oak Ridge to have a vote. Voting is what we are sent here to do, and the American people hold us accountable when we have votes. And votes enable us to be held accountable, and those votes will take place. The vote today is exciting and encouraging and energizing, but it is only a first step, and the critical tests and profoundly significant steps will be next week when we vote first on the bipartisan compromise that our colleagues have fashioned, Senators Manchin and Toomey have together forged, on national criminal background checks. Not necessarily as strong as many of us might have preferred, not a final or ultimate result on this issue for all time, but a solid foundation and a path forward to enable more bipartisan compromise, more momentum and impetus. And the brave families from Newtown who were part of this discussion this week deserve our thanks as well. They turned the tide. They faced our colleagues in meetings, visit after visit, conversation after conversation, painful, demanding, grief-stricken, in recalling those hours after that horrific, unspeakable tragedy. As one who arrived there within hours of the shooting, I saw first their unimaginable pain and grief as they came out of the Sandy Hook Firehouse, learning for the first time that their babies would not return. Loved ones, teachers, educators, perishing while trying to save those children in their care. Those families came to Washington to tell their stories and advocate for change so that others would be spared that same experience, so that others would be saved from the same fate as those 3,300 who have died since Newtown and the horror that they have experienced and their families. Just 4 months ago, the conventional wisdom was that gun violence legislation would never go anywhere in the United States Congress. In fact, gun violence was politically untouchable. Just 4 days ago, 60 votes was thought to be unreachable as a goal. The fact of the matter is that the political landscape is changing seismically as we speak here, as we deliberate. Minds are changing, voices are piercing that conventional wisdom, and the courage and compassion of the Newtown families have disproved and completely defeated the pundits, the conventional wisdom, the prognosticators who said it couldn't be done. The world watched that tragedy on December 14 in Newtown, and I said on that evening at the vigil at St. Rose of Lima Church, the world is watching Newtown. Indeed, the world watched Newtown, and today the world watched the United States Senate as it took this historic and, for many of our colleagues, a courageous and brave step. Today we kept faith with those families and the victims of that tragedy in a first step to finally do something about gun violence. And now we must continue working, taking nothing for granted, avoiding complacency and confidence, because every step is uphill when it comes to gun violence. I want to thank particularly two of my colleagues, Joe Manchin and Pat Toomey, because they stepped forward from states that may not be as receptive to what they have done as others, but they deserve the thanks and gratitude of their states in their statesmanship in supporting and forging this compromise. I will continue to support and work for a truly universal background check system. But this bipartisan compromise represents significant progress. It's a vast improvement over current law. It will make sure that a lot fewer criminals get their hands on guns. It will make our streets and schools safer. On the morning of December 14, I, along with Senator Murphy, pledged that I would do everything I could to make sure that more parents will not have to bury their children because of preventable gun violence. And expanded background checks are part of that pledge, and we are helping to fulfill it by supporting it. And they're only part of a bigger, more comprehensive solution to this problem. But this compromise is a good starting point for next week's debate on gun violence. We have talked a lot about Newtown and about the victims there who have evoked our most powerful grief, breaking our hearts, evoking memories of our own children at that age. And as I've said, I went to Newtown as a public official, but what I saw was through the eyes of a parent. Other victims with loved ones evoke the same memories. And I want today to evoke the memory of another tragedy that many of us in Connecticut remember well. It happened at the Hartford Distributors, just outside of Hartford, on a beautiful morning, August of 2010, August 2nd. And a lot of what I'm going to summarize here comes from a straight newspaper account that appeared in the Hartford Courant shortly afterward. As the Courant reported, in 3 minutes on that bright summer morning, the shooter there, Omar Thornton, executed 8 men, including himself, shooting them all from behind and laughing at one point as he chased down a wounded victim. He went into a kitchenette near the office saying he wanted a drink of water. He pulled a pistol from his lunch pail and shot Operations Director Louis Felder. One of the witnesses said he heard Felder yell, "Omar, you can't," followed by loud bangs. Hollander was hit by one of the bullets that passed through Felder, and as he crawled into his father's office, Hartford Distributors is owned by a family, the Hollander family. He heard another employee yell, "Omar, no. Omar, no." Thornton shot him twice, once in the back of the head and once in the forehead. He systematically executed another 6 after those 2, and then killed himself. The victims that day were men who came to work every day, working men who had families. They came to work expecting to come home at the end of the day. Their families expected them to come home. They were men who had worked in that place for many years by dint of their sweat and backbreaking labor, come to a place in life where they could enjoy it. They had enough financial security that they expected to enjoy it for some time. And the killer that day deprived them of their futures and their families as well. Gun violence affects all of us in different ways, and I have visited the memorial that was established for the brave men who died that day at Hartford Distributor. It is a quiet, peaceful place, exquisitely and beautifully done, and it evokes memories of men who died while they were on the job because of a deranged individual who was, in fact, about to be fired. Connecticut's experience with this kind of death extends to its own facilities. The state lottery experienced a similar horrific, brutal slaying, played out in seconds that seemed to take an eternity on a Friday morning, routine for dozens of state lottery office workers, turning that morning into a nightmare of blood, fear, and betrayal. The shooter was named Matthew Beck, and he summarily executed men and women there that day. Connecticut remembers those employees, state employees who provided public service day in and day out and were killed while they were at work. Again, working men and women who wanted nothing more than to go home safely that night. My colleague, Chris Murphy, has recounted many stories, many of them children, almost all of them with futures ahead that were ended brutally and horrifically because of gun violence. We have taken a step today, a first step, hopefully followed by others next week. And I want to end today by again thanking members of this chamber for giving us the opportunity to debate and vote and say to the American people, we are willing to be held accountable. The majority of American people want common sense, sensible measures to end the violence on the streets, in our neighborhoods, and in our places of work, like Hartford Distributors and the state lottery, where hardworking men and women come to their jobs, playing by the rules, expecting fairness, and the opportunity to go home that night. And I want to thank this chamber, the members who voted today, and I hope will join us in the future in making sure that fewer victims perish as a result of this horrific epidemic in our country of gun violence. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor. And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. On the Senate floor today, it's been all about gun control and the gun control debate. Earlier today, senators voted 68 to 31 to move forward with debate on the firearms bill. 60 votes were needed to proceed to the bill. 16 Republicans voted in favor. 2 Democrats voted against. All independents voted in favor. Debate expected to get underway in earnest tomorrow. We earlier today had debate and remarks from Judiciary Committee Chair Patrick Leahy before the vote actually took place, and we'll show those remarks to you right now.
President, earlier this week, I spoke about the need for the Senate to consider legislation to help increase America's safety by reducing gun violence. I came on the floor of the Senate and I urged my fellow senators to abandon efforts to filibuster proceeding to this bill. The Senate should not have to overcome a filibuster to respond to the call for action in response to the gun violence they are experiencing. Mr. President, I have the privilege of being the longest-serving member of this body, and I've watched debate on so many issues. If there's ever an issue where all 100 of us should vote yes or no, it's here. And I was encouraged by the comments of a number of Senate Republicans that they're prepared to debate these matters and will not support this wrong-headed filibuster. Even the Wall Street Journal editorialized against the filibuster yesterday in a lead editorial entitled "The GOP's Gun Control Misfire." Now, I don't agree with much of that editorial, but I would quote this. If conservatives want to prove their gun control bona fides, the way to do it is debate the merit and vote on the floor. Senators should understand what is in this bill that a small minority of Republicans are seeking to prevent the Senate from even considering. The bill has 3 parts. None of them threaten Second Amendment rights. None of them call for gun confiscation or a government registry. In fact, 2 of the 3 parts have always had bipartisan support. And with regard to the 3rd component, the provisions closing loopholes in our current background check system, Senators Manchin and Toomey yesterday announced they're going to have a bipartisan amendment for this component as well. And yesterday, Senator Collins of Maine, the senior senator from Maine, and I were able to announce another step toward consensus. And we had previously been engaged in discussions with law enforcement and victims groups. More recently, we've been engaged in discussions with the National Rifle Association. We've agreed on modifications to the Stop Illegal Trafficking Firearms Act that addresses all of its substantive concerns while doing as we've always wanted to do, providing law enforcement officials with the tools they need to investigate and prosecute illegal gun trafficking and straw purchasing. Now, Senator Collins and I are both strong supporters and advocates of Second Amendment rights for law-abiding Americans. And it seems absurd that some senators nonetheless persist in filibustering consideration of our bill. We, the American people, expect us to stand up and face our responsibilities. Whether we like having to vote or not, we have an oath of office to uphold the Constitution, to uphold our laws. And Congress has to confront the serious role the straw purchasing and gun trafficking play in supplying criminals with firearms for illegal purposes. It's not enough to stand on the floor of the Senate and say you're pro-law enforcement. Let us take as a given everybody is pro-law enforcement, but then give law enforcement the tools they need. The Bipartisan Stop Illegal Trafficking in Firearms Act will create specific federal criminal statutes prohibiting the trafficking and straw purchasing of firearms. It will also strengthen other law enforcement tools to assist those investigating these crimes. It's a common sense response to help in the fight against gun violence, and it will help law enforcement. That's why law enforcement so strongly supports our bill. Yet, some are seeking to filibuster it. Let them go to law enforcement groups and say they're trying to block them and take away the tools they need to keep every one of us safe. Congress should be confronting the serious role that straw purchasing and gun trafficking play in supplying criminals with firearms for illegal purposes, not ducking the issue. Stand up and be counted. Stand up and be counted. Don't give speeches saying you're in favor of law enforcement, but we're going to take away tools law enforcement needs. Stand up and be counted. Stand up and be counted. If we can all agree that criminals and those adjudicated as mentally ill should not buy firearms, why should we not try to plug the loopholes in the law that allow them to buy guns without background checks? Stand up and be counted. It's a simple matter of common sense. And if we agree that the background check system is worthwhile, should we not try to inform its content and use so it can be more effective? What responsible gun owner objects to improving the background check system? Stand up and be counted. In our January hearing, I pointed out that Wayne LaPierre of the NRA testified in 1999 in favor of mandatory criminal background checks for, as he put it, every sale at every gun show. He went on to emphasize NRA's support for closing loophole in the background check system by saying, in what has become an oft-quoted remark, no loopholes anywhere for anyone. Well, of course, it's common sense to close the gun show loophole. The Senate voted to do so in 1999. We should vote to do so again. This time we should get it enacted. And that's one of the ways in which the bipartisan proposals from Senators Manchin and Toomey would improve the law if we're able to stop this ill-conceived filibuster and get to the bill. Americans across this great country are looking to us for solutions and for action, not filibustering or sloganeering. Americans are saying, stand up and be counted. I opened our first hearing on these issues in January, asking senators on both sides of the aisle to join in the discussion as part of a collective effort to find solutions to help ensure that no family, no school, no community ever has to endure the kind of tragedy the families of Newtown and Aurora, Oak Creek, Tucson, Blacksburg, or Columbine had to suffer. And as emphasized throughout the committee process, the Second Amendment is secure. It's going to remain secure and protected. That's part of my oath of office as a senator. In two recent cases, the Supreme Court has confirmed that the Second Amendment, like the other aspects of our Bill of Rights, secures a fundamental individual right. Americans have the right to self-defense. They have the right to have guns in their homes to protect their families. No one's going to take away these rights or these guns. Second Amendment rights are the foundation on which our discussion rests. They're not at risk. But what is at risk? We cannot close our eyes to what is at risk. Lives are at risk when responsible people fail to stand up for laws that will keep the guns out of the hands of those who will use them to commit mass murder. So I ask my fellow senators, focus our discussion debate on these proposed statutory measures intended to better protect our children and all Americans. Ours is a free society, an open society. a wonderful society. We should be coming together as elected representatives of all the American people to consider how to become a safer and more secure society. And I would have hoped that all senators in both parties would join together in good faith to strengthen our law enforcement efforts against gun violence and to protect public safety. Let's focus on our responsibilities to the American people. We're the 100 people. There are only 100 senators. We're elected to represent more than 314 million Americans. That is an awesome responsibility. Let's stand up to that responsibility. We're accountable to those people. We're not accountable to special interest groups on either the right or the left. We're accountable to 314 million Americans. These special interest lobbies on either the left or the right should not dictate what we do. We do not need a lobby's permission to pass laws to fight crime and improve public safety. That's our responsibility. And I urge senators to be less concerned with special interest scorecards and more focused on fulfilling our oath to faithfully discharge the duties of our office as United States senators. I consider myself a responsible gun owner, but I'm also someone who cherishes all of our constitutional rights. As a senator who's sworn an oath to uphold those rights, but as a father and a grandfather, as a former prosecutor who has seen the results of gun violence firsthand, I've been working to build consensus around common sense solutions. I'm prepared to debate and vote on the measures before us. I challenge other senators. Do the same. Do the same. Stand up and be counted. Stand up and be counted. A filibuster says you're not willing to take a stand. You vote maybe. Stand up and be counted. Have the courage. Stand up and be counted. And then let us work together to make America safer. All Americans. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
Mr. President, yesterday I had the solemn privilege of meeting with some of the families who lost loved ones in the Sandy Hook shooting. As a father, I can hardly begin to comprehend the enormous grief that these individuals have suffered, losing such a young child or a spouse or a mother in an act of what would appear to be just senseless violence. Burying your child is something that no parent should have to do. The families and friends of the victims at Sandy Hook are owed the dignity and respect of a transparent, good faith effort to address gun violence. I do believe there is a common ground upon which Republicans and Democrats can come together. The issue of mental health of the gun owner is that common ground for me, along with enforcing current laws that are on the books. If there's one thread that connects the horrific series of gun violence episodes in our country, particularly in recent times, it is the mental illness of the shooter. In every case, the perpetrator's mental illness should have been detected, and in some instances it was detected, but not reported. And these individuals should never be allowed access to a gun. This is actually something we can and should do something about. We need to make sure that the mentally ill are getting the help they need, not guns. As I said, this is something that I believe all of us can agree on. In response to the tragedy at Virginia Tech in 2007, the United States Senate and the Congress unanimously passed a measure to bolster mental health reporting requirements on background checks. Some states, like mine, Texas, have received high marks for their compliance. But many states have essentially been non-compliant, and the Department of Justice has failed to adequately back up implementation of the law. So essentially the law that we passed in the wake of the Virginia Tech shooting to require reporting of people who are actually adjudicated mentally ill in their respective states is not working the way it should. Rather than just string along an ineffective program, I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to fix it, and we should fix it. I want to say just a word, though, about symbolism versus solutions. I am not interested in Congress voting on a measure that would have no impact on the horrific violence we've seen in recent months. I am not interested in a symbolic gesture which would offer the families of the Sandy Hook shooting no real solutions that they seek. To a person, they told me they're not political. They don't come with an agenda. They're not asking us to pass a specific piece of legislation. They just want to know that their loved one did not die in vain and that something good can come out of this terrible tragedy. So I think dealing with this mental health reporting issue is a common ground we could come together on. But we also need to make sure that we're not just going to pass additional laws that will not be enforced. What possible solace could that be to these families for Congress just to pass additional laws that will never be enforced? Take, for example, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, the NICS system as it's called, which flags people who lie on their background check. The annual number of cases referred for prosecution fell sharply during the first 2 years of the current president's term of office. Indeed, there was a 58% drop in referrals and a 70% drop in prosecutions for people who lie on the background check. We can fix this. We can fix this. Let's make sure that guns aren't getting into the hands of people who we all agree should not have them. We could be doing this right now with broad bipartisan support. But let me just conclude with a couple of observations about where we find ourselves with an 11 o'clock vote on an underlying bill which remains controversial and which I think the majority leader and all of us know has very little chance, if any, of going anywhere. We heard yesterday that our colleagues from West Virginia and Ohio have come together on a bipartisan background check bill. I asked my staff as recently as on my way over here whether that had actually been released, the language, so we can actually read it and find out what's in it, and it has not. We have no commitment in front of the Senate by the majority leader that there will be a robust debate and amendment process, because there are a lot of amendments that need to be offered to whatever that so far unwritten bill says, I'm sure, and we need to have a full, robust, transparent discussion of this issue in front of the American people. So I'm not going to vote to proceed to a bill that has not yet been written, no matter how well-intentioned it may be. We need to make sure that what we do is address the cause of this violence and to come up not with symbolic gestures that will have no impact or to pass other laws that will not be enforced, but to come together with real solutions. Rather than put on a show and pat ourselves on the back and call it a day, let's do something good to make sure we've done everything in our human capacity to prevent another Sandy Hook. This is what these families want. This is what they deserve. And this is what the American people deserve. Now, this calls the United States Senate to exercise its historic and essential role in bringing all sides together to try to come up with solutions. But if we can't do that here, if we can't do that now, when will we ever address this tragedy? The President has told some of these victims' families that this side of the aisle doesn't really care about their loss. That's not true. It's false. The President is wrong. All of us care about these families, and all of us should care about violence in our communities, and we should try to work together to find ways to address this, not in a symbolic sort of way, but in a real way that offers a solution and maybe just a little bit of progress on this issue that would allow these families to say, no, my loved one did not die in vain. Something good came out of this. We want to work together to find real solutions to this type of senseless, incomprehensible violence that's taken too many lives. And I hope we will.
Those remarks prior to the vote in the Senate on gun control, lawmakers did go on to approve moving the bipartisan bill forward 68-31, with 16 Republicans voting in favor. Now, progress is also being made on immigration legislation. The Associated Press reporting this afternoon 4 Democratic and 4 Republican senators have reached agreement on all the major elements of sweeping legislation to remake the nation's immigration laws and expect to unveil the bill next week. Democratic Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois says the bill probably will be rolled out Tuesday. The landmark legislation would overhaul illegal immigration programs, crack down on employers, boost border security, and put 11 million immigrants in the U.S. illegally on the path to citizenship. Next will come the uncertain public phase as voters and other lawmakers get a look at the measure. And back to gun control now, and remarks from Connecticut Senator Blumenthal on the floor earlier today.
Mr. President, thank you. We are on the verge of a historic vote that will determine whether we make America safer and assure that we do everything possible as senators and citizens to assure there are no more new towns. On the evening of December 14, when we left the firehouse at Sandy Hook, there was a vigil at a church in Newtown, St. Rose of Lima. presided over by Father Bob, who is Monsignor Robert Weiss, a very moving and powerful experience. The church was filled. People stood at the windows to hear what was going on. The governor spoke, and so did I. And I said that evening, the world is watching Newtown. And in fact, the world was watching Newtown, as we knew from the horror of that afternoon when many of us arrived at the church and first at the firehouse to see families emerging and learning for the first time that their children, their babies, would not be coming home that evening. It was an experience that will stay with me forever. The sights and sounds of that afternoon, filled with grief and pain, will never leave me. The world was watching Newtown that day and that evening, and has watched Newtown and Connecticut in the days and months since, and I have been privileged to spend many hours and days, weeks, and these past months with the families. The world has watched the families, and it has seen in them and in Newtown, a great community, a quintessential New England town, the strength and courage that was as unimaginable as the horror of that day. Strength and courage that represents what is good about America and what is strong and courageous about our nation. The world has watched Newtown and the families of Newtown, and it has watched Connecticut. And now the world is watching the United States Senate. It is watching the Senate to see whether democracy works. Sounds simple, but it's true. Will democracy work to reflect the majority of the United States of America, the majority of our people who say we need to do something about the guns? That is what the families said to me that day and in days since, and what people in Connecticut and across the country have said to their senators. We must do something about gun violence. I remember talking to one of the families that evening and saying, you know, when you're ready, we ought to talk about what we can do to stop gun violence in measures in the United States Congress. And she said to me, I'm ready now. The United States Senate must be ready now to act. It must keep faith with those families and victims as the world watches, with Benjamin Andrew Wheeler, age 6. His father, David, is here today, and he is here in spirit as we decide in the United States Senate today whether we will move forward toward progress. Anna Grace Marquez Green, also age 6. Her mother, Nelba, is here today, and she is with us in spirit. Dylan Hockley, age 6, whose mother, Nicole, is here, also here in spirit. And Jesse Lewis, age 6. His father, Neil Heslin, is here. Mary Sherlock, one of the 6 educators killed at Sandy Hook Elementary, whose husband, Bill, is here. Jesse, Mary are here with us, too. And we know that compromise and action are possible because 2 of our colleagues have forged a bipartisan compromise that will enable us to come closer. It is imperfect. It is less than what I would have preferred in achieving universal background checks. It is a starting point. It is a step in the right direction. And it will help us achieve a larger bipartisan compromise, because background checks are only one part of a comprehensive strategy that must include a ban on illegal trafficking, strengthening school safety, as well as mental health initiatives, and a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And I will be privileged to spearhead that effort on high-capacity magazines, hopefully next week after today's vote, along with colleagues such as Dianne Feinstein and my colleague Chris Murphy. Today, let us decide, as the world watches, there will be no more Newtowns. That is what the families want. That is what America wants. Let us resolve that we will make democracy work as we go beyond this first step and decide to proceed on a bill that also is imperfect but provides a starting point, provides a way forward so that we can make our communities safer. The families of Newtown have performed an extraordinary service to our nation. Not only has the world watched and been inspired by their strength and courage, but they have turned the tide. They have visited with our colleagues, and they have impacted this process more profoundly and more directly than any other single group. They have shown that we can break the stranglehold of special interests and the NRA, that speaking truth to power still works. And to them, we owe a special thanks. To them, as a nation, we owe a debt of gratitude for the lives that will be saved, for the futures that will be given, even if their children and their loved ones will not enjoy that future. They have given futures to countless Americans who will be saved from the scourge of gun violence. And so to them I say thank you. They are in this building, and their children, their loved ones, are with us today in spirit as we take this historic step.
The Associated Press is writing that 4 Democratic and 4 Republican senators have reached agreement on all the major elements of legislation to remake the nation's immigration laws and are expected to unveil the bill next week. A Democratic whip, Senator Dick Durbin, says the bill will probably be rolled out on Tuesday. Earlier today, the Senate voted 68-31 this morning to move forward with debate on gun legislation. The bill includes measures to combat gun trafficking, improve school security, and expand background checks on gun buyers. A number of amendments are expected on the bill, including one from Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and Republican Senator Pat Toomey. Their measure would require background checks for firearm sales at gun shows and on the Internet, but it would exempt gun sales between individuals. Here's more about that amendment from this morning's Washington Journal.
Here's the front page of USA Today this morning. Today's gun vote, the article co-written by reporter Gregory Cordy of USA Today. Mr. Cordy, what's happening in the Senate in just a few minutes when they come into session at 9:30?
They're going to come into session, and then under Senate rules, they have to wait at least an hour before they can have a cloture vote. They have a quorum call. And then we're going to have a procedural vote, and it's probably one of the most watched procedural votes that we've had in the Senate in a long time. It's a vote on a motion to proceed to debate on the gun bill. And it's an attempt to get around a threatened filibuster by some conservative Republicans on that bill. It's closely watched because the NRA says it's going to score it. It's going to take that vote into account as it gives members of the Senate their letter grades in advance of their next election. It's being closely watched because it's a key hurdle to even get to any kind of a bill. And then if we get 60 votes there, then we're on to what could be a weeks-long debate on the gun bill that came out of the Judiciary Committee, but also any number of amendments that will be presented by senators over the next few days and weeks.
And the Manchin-Toomey background check, that is an amendment to S-649, correct?
Yeah, there was a hope that it could get out ahead of this bill and maybe be a standalone bill. At this point in the process, the only way is to do it is an amendment. Majority Leader Harry Reid says it will be the first amendment. It's amendment number 1, and it's frankly the amendment that makes all of the other amendments possible, because this is seen as a breakthrough that will allow enough Republicans to see that there's some room for compromise, that they're comfortable voting this morning to allow debate to proceed.
Now, Gregory Cordy, if they do not get to 60 votes, if the Democrats do not file cloture, are able to get cloture, what happens?
Well, Harry Reid says he's going to continue then to hammer away at this issue and seek further cloture votes down the line, essentially force the Republicans into a filibuster. The reason why in modern Senate history filibusters usually are just threatened and never really happen, because the mere threat of a filibuster can stop consideration of a bill. Harry Reid is calling that bluff. He says he's going to continue to push this bill, and if Republicans want to filibuster, he's going to make them come to the floor and filibuster.
Is there a plan by Republicans right now to filibuster?
Well, when you say Republicans, you know, you're talking about
individual members.
Exactly. The 3 that are most closely watched probably are going to be Rand Paul of Kentucky, Mike Lee of Utah, and Ted Cruz of Texas. Those are the ones that have been talking filibuster most lately, although in the past couple of days they've had a somewhat more nuanced statement on this. What they say is they're not trying to block a vote on the bill, they just want to extend the debate. They think that an issue as important as the Second Amendment, as important as gun rights, deserves a drawn-out debate in the Senate where every amendment gets a good back and forth and a good discussion. The problem we have right now, they say, is that we have really kind of a skeleton bill that We don't know what amendments are going to be offered. We don't know what the final substance is going to look like, so they say they're justified in drawing out the debate as long as possible so that people can understand it.
So we read an article earlier this morning about Senator Coburn calling this Manchin-Toomey amendment unworkable. So should we keep an eye on how he votes on cloture as well? Could he vote to proceed even though he's against the bill? Do you see that happening?
Coburn is an interesting player in this because before there was a Manchin-Toomey amendment, there was the prospect of a Manchin-Coburn amendment. Joe Manchin had been talking to Senator Coburn for a number of days or a week to see if they could reach a compromise. Senator Coburn backed out of that, saying that any kind of background check scheme he thought was going to be unworkable. Even yesterday, Senators Toomey and Manchin went out of their way to compliment Senator Coburn for his helpfulness, for his insight, for being very helpful to the process. And then a couple hours later, Senator Coburn released a statement saying he's against this amendment that he had so much input on. What that means in terms of how he's going to vote this morning on the procedural vote is anybody's guess. As of late last night, there were still a lot of senators saying they need to see more about this amendment and take it under consideration.
Senators Manchin and Toomey are just two of the co-sponsors of this amendment. Senators Kirk and Schumer are also co-sponsors. Why were they not at the press conference yesterday?
Well, you'd have to ask them, but certainly Toomey and Manchin are the more centrist, pro-gun members who can help maybe break through to some senators who support gun rights. Both Toomey and Manchin have A ratings from the NRA. Schumer and Kirk do not. Kirk, for Republican, has a D or an F rating. So they may not be the best faces for an amendment that is intended to try to win over some pro-gun votes.
Front page of the Daily News this morning, all for nothing, they editorialize. Congress sells out with soft gun deal.
Well, that's a tabloid headline, and that may be some sentiment. On the other hand, the Brady Center, the Mayors Against Illegal Guns, a number of pro-rights or pro-gun control groups see this as a positive development and at least getting a vote to the floor of the Senate. You know, President Obama, after Sandy Hook, proposed this package of gun control measures. But really, in recent months, what you've heard from President Obama is, I just want to vote. And so anything that makes a vote more likely, I think a lot of gun control groups can see as a positive development.
Gregory Corti is our guest, congressional reporter for USA Today. The Senate has just come into session. Reverend Black is currently giving the invocation there. We're going to keep an eye on the Senate to see if there is any action here in the next half hour while we're live on the Washington Journal, and if so, we'll take that to you live. Of course, you can always turn to the Senate on C-SPAN 2 if you're tired of our conversation here on the Washington Journal. But first call up comes from Dominic in Middletown, New York, Republican line. Please go ahead, Dominic.
Yes, I would just like to comment that, you know, why all these Democrats want to take our rights away, starting with the Second Amendment. This is very dangerous. They don't stop this gun control. It never ends. It started in 1968. And by all their proposed legislation would do nothing to protect our children. It would do nothing at all. That's what gets me offended mostly. You need armed police officers, maybe in plain clothes, in every school. What gets me appalled, they protect airports, state courts, federal buildings, federal judges, or politicians with armed guards or Homeland Security, but our children are not being protected. Hunting rounds are much more powerful than these 223 rounds that they keep saying assault weapons. A hunting round like a 30-06 is much more powerful, a 300 Magnum. So if a guy goes into school now with a bolt-action rifle and kills 40 kids in 4 minutes, he keeps reloading. What difference does it make?
All right, Dominic, we got the point. Mr. Corti.
Well, I think the caller points out some of the difficulty that Congress is having in legislating in this area of, you know, all guns are different, and trying to figure out the threshold that makes a rifle an assault rifle, or how many rounds is too many when it comes to high-capacity magazines. The callers from New York, the New York law set that capacity at 7 rounds. You can't have a magazine of more than 7 rounds. Manufacturers don't make 7-round clips or magazines, so the compromise was you can have a 10-round magazine but only put 7 bullets in it. It's a tricky area to legislate in, and Congress is, I think, trying to find that right balance.
Senator Reid is just introducing the Senate as an open session. Let's listen to a second and see what he's saying.
He fired nearly 80 rounds from an automatic weapon, spraying bullets on the parking lot and into this IHOP restaurant that was packed for breakfast with customers. He killed 4 people instantly, wounded 7 others, and he took his own life after that. That took 85 seconds. And in those 85 seconds, 5 lives ended and countless more were altered forever. 3 Nevada Army National Guardsmen were on their way to work that morning. 31-year-old Sergeant First Class Miranda McElhenney, 38-year-old Sergeant First Class Christian Rejay, and 35-year-old Major Heath Kelly. Florence Gunderson, who was eating breakfast with her husband, was also killed, murdered. In that 85 seconds, Carson City joined the likes of Tucson, Fort Hood, Texas, Blackbird, Virginia, Columbine, Colorado, and scores of other cities and towns in America rocked by mass shootings in recent decades.
And that's Majority Leader Reid on the Senate floor. You can go to C-SPAN 2 if you'd like to hear the rest of that statement. We expect Senator McConnell, the Minority Leader, to come out as well when Senator Reid is finished prior to all this going on. He was talking essentially about magazines, high-capacity magazines. Is that one of the amendments that will be offered?
Yeah, we've heard a lot of these stories over the past couple of days, and we're going to hear a lot more over the next couple of weeks while senators talk about specific instances of gun violence and what might have been done to prevent them. The caller from New York before talked about bolt-action rifles. I think the majority leader is making the case that these are high-capacity, high-speed semi-automatic weapons that fire a large number of rounds in a short period of time and can kill a lot of people. So you have assault weapons is part of the conversation. You have capacity, magazine capacity. You know, how long do you have to shoot before you have to reload? These are all critical questions. Each one of these are going to have 1, maybe 2, several amendments, each senator with their own attempt to try to strike the right balance.
On the front page of USA Today, what has been proposed? Just a quick chart here. President's plan to reduce gun violence requires universal background checks with common sense exceptions only for in-family transfers and short-term hunting use, strengthens national instant criminal background check system by requiring better data from states, and the draft Senate gun bill mirrors the president's proposal with narrow exceptions from background checks, and then Wednesday's background check deal closes loopholes for gun shows and internet sales but exempts friends and neighbors. Transactions between private individuals allow state concealed carry permit in lieu of background check, prohibits the government from maintaining a gun registry, specifies that medical privacy laws don't apply to mental health records in background check database, and reduces background check turnaround time from 3 days to 2 days. In 4 years, it would be reduced to 1 day. The mental health provisions, Gregory Courtier, are those going to be controversial?
They aren't getting as much attention as some of the other ones, but that is a difficult area as well. The concern is from a lot of mental health groups that you don't want to stigmatize mental health issues to the extent that people who do want to seek help don't, because they're afraid that they will have their Second Amendment rights taken away from them. There's a question of what kinds of mental illness make a person dangerous to themselves and others, and how that information is used once it gets into a database. As you mentioned, the Manchin-Toomey proposal specifically says that HIPAA, the health privacy law, doesn't apply to these records. That's something that Obama actually was trying to work on through regulation, but it can still be a difficult line to draw for Congress as it takes this up.
Thomas is in Toms River, New Jersey. Democrat. Thomas, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tom Zimmer. I want to preface a few things before I make my statement. First off, I am paralyzed from the neck down because I was shot 34 years ago here in Toms River by another child who was playing with a gun, his father's gun. And another kid was killed here a couple of days ago in Toms River. A 4-year-old shot a 6-year-old with a gun. So, I mean, it's all speed up to be held accountable on guns. But, I mean, any law that can be made whatsoever that can cut down on the gun injuries and the gun deaths because of the trauma that goes along not only to the individual, not only to the families, but also the trauma to the country because it pulls so many people away from work. It pulls so many people away from their responsibilities other than their families. And also the cost of it for the country in dollars. Talking about this big debt and deficit all the time. And nobody wants to talk about how much money it costs with all the injuries that come along with guns. 100,000 people get shot every single year in our country.
Thomas, can you tell us what happened 34 years ago?
Yes, I was a little boy. I went to my friend's house. He told me his dad had a gun. I was curious. I was 11 years old, and I went over there. And he showed me the gun, and the gun went off by accident. And I got shot in the head. And so I've dedicated my life to teaching children not to. So I've been speaking in schools the last 21 years regarding this issue. To talk about kids, the thing that scares me the most when I go to the schools, I ask the children how many of your parents own guns. And half the kids always raise their hands, and I ask, do any of your parents lock them up? Many of their parents don't lock the guns up because they tell their kids don't touch. And I think that's a very, very irresponsible way of thinking. It's because of children are really children.
Thank you for sharing your personal experience. Mr. Cordy?
Yeah, that's an all too common story. And here's the tricky part, is that, and he didn't go into details about whether that gun was legally owned. Obviously, if it happened 34 years ago, it was pre-background check. Would a background check have prevented his friend's parents from owning that gun if they were law-abiding citizens? At what point does personal responsibility in the ownership and storage of guns, what role does that have to play? And so you'll hear a lot of Republicans over the next couple of days in the Senate talk about how a background check would not necessarily have prevented a tragedy like that or many of the other tragedies because guns are already so pervasive in our society and people can get them in other ways.
Senator McConnell is currently on the Senate floor. This is live. You can go to C-SPAN 2 to watch the whole thing, but he just announced that he would vote against cloture. Gregory Cordy.
Not surprising. He's been saying that for the past few days. Obviously, Democrats only need a handful of Republicans if every Democrat votes for cloture. That's not a given, by the way. I mean, there are some kind of red state Democrats, rural Democrats. Max Baucus would be one of them. Mark Pryor, who are big question marks on whether they will vote to proceed on this gun bill.
Mary Landrieu?
Mary Landrieu is one of them.
And she and Mark Pryor are up for re-election, aren't they?
And so is Baucus. Baucus is an interesting case study. He's got an A+ rating from the NRA, highest rated Democratic senator in the NRA scores. He voted for a universal background check as part of the 1994 crime bill and was punished for it. He survived an election by 5 percentage points. It was the closest election he ever had. But he came back 10 years later and voted against the extension of the assault weapons ban that was part of that crime bill, and has been walking a pretty fine line on gun rights ever since. Has been a reliable pro-gun vote in the Senate, but now he is a much-watched Democrat, and he's going to be one to watch as well.
Do you know offhand what Mary Landrieu's rating is with the NRA? I do. Jocelyn in Jewett City, Connecticut, independent line. Please go ahead with your question or comment for Gregory Cordy of USA Today.
Hi, good day, Gregory. First of all, I want to thank you for bringing up this very important issue. I have a comment and then I have a question. First of all, I immigrated from Canada 14 years ago. I met and fell in love with my husband, who happened to be from Louisiana. He was active duty in the Navy. We then went to live in Louisiana, and it was my first exposure to guns. I had never seen gun racks on the back of pickup trucks. It was quite a surprise. Here's the deal, and this is what I can't seem to wrap my mind around. I am an intelligent, educated woman. I actually am a supporter of the right to bear arms. However, you know, being that I am a lover of history, and I study that very much, when the Constitution was written, it was written at a time where, you know, automatic guns would have been the same as, you know, something out of Star Trek. It just wasn't there. I believe, you know, my son is 12. When he turns 16, I am very happy to see him go off with his father on his first hunting trip. But here's the deal. Military-grade weapons, the fact that they are allowed to be in civilian hands, how did that ever come to be allowed and acceptable? Because when my husband goes on his first hunting trip with my son, and he will go and he will purchase a hunting rifle in which my son will have taken courses with my husband. He is a Boy Scout. You know, we are teaching him through Scouts, through their BB gun program, gun safety. We will then go and buy a gun cabinet. I will not have ammunition in my home. You know, there is as you said earlier, responsible gun ownership. Why military-grade weaponry is even considered to be allowed in the hands of civilians? How did that ever come to be, sir?
Congress, as we were just saying before your call, Congress in 1994 passed a crime bill that included an assault weapons ban. It was the law of the land for 10 years. During that time, we saw Columbine. We saw a number of other shootings. Congress in 2004, when it was time to renew the crime bill, decided that the assault weapons ban was ineffective and chose to not extend that particular provision of the crime bill. I'll also say there is a debate about what constitutes an assault weapon, and I think you discuss military-style weapons. What makes something a military-style weapon? Is it the pistol grip? Is it the capacity? Is it the semi-automatic? How many rounds it can shoot? These are all tricky areas. The AR-15 is a very popular rifle. It's similar to the rifle that Adam Lanza used in Sandy Hook, but it's also one that many hunters own and use and enjoy sporting with, and that is probably going to be the most difficult part of this bill. It's the least popular of the many. If you look at polls and if you talk to senators, it's the least popular of the many policy prescriptions that are out there.
It's at 11 a.m. that the Senate will hold its cloture vote on the motion to proceed to the firearms bill. You can see Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut is now on the floor of the Senate. Live on C-SPAN 2 if you want to watch this pre-debate to the actual vote at 11. Gregory Korte, you've got Ohio background. I presume you're from Ohio.
Yeah.
Graduate of Ohio University, worked for the Plain Dealer, the Cincinnati Enquirer, the Beacon Journal. Did you grow up with guns, being from Ohio?
I grew up as a city kid in Cincinnati, so no, my parents didn't have guns. I know people who have guns. You know, Ohio is a very diverse state. It's a very urban state, but also a very rural state, and it has this dichotomy. That's what makes it sort of this swing state. It's got this dichotomy of urban centers where guns are seen as you know, a plague associated with gang violence and high murder rates. But guns are also seen in southeastern Ohio and more rural areas of the state as a way of life, something to pass down to your children. Rob Portman, the senator from Ohio, tells this story about how his grandfather was a Swiss immigrant, was found dead in a duck blind holding his hunting rifle with a smile on his face. And now Senator Portman has taken possession of that gun. He's handed it down to his children. It's that kind of a way of life in many parts of Ohio and throughout the country.
What happens if the Senate actually passes a bill? What happens then?
Well, obviously it goes to the House then, and the House is controlled by Republicans. Speaker Boehner has been very cautious, sort of a wait and see. We'll see what the Senate does. There seems to be a commitment to at least take up what the Senate does, but we'll have to wait and see. But it's a Republican-controlled chamber that has a lot of rural votes from gun areas of the country with a strong gun culture, and it would certainly be an uphill battle to get something passed in the House.
Do you foresee something passing in the Senate at this point? I know it's early.
It's always dangerous to try to predict. If we can get through this culture, it seems like at least something will pass. The question is what that is. I mean, we're going to have any number of amendments. There may be a number of amendments to strengthen gun rights. Even part of this Manchin-Toomey proposal are provisions that would protect people who want to cross state lines with a firearm from being subject to the local gun laws of the local jurisdiction if they're transporting across state lines, to allow active service military members to more easily buy their own guns. I would expect a number of provisions to allow people to carry guns in public places, to ensure concealed carry reciprocity across states. So we may have a mishmash of some provisions that are more stringent and some provisions that strengthen or enhance gun rights. But my sense is there will be something.
Mr. Cordy, we've talked about this Toomey-Manchin amendment as the background check amendment, but you're indicating there's a lot more to it. Is it almost a substitute to S-649?
It's primarily about background checks, and as I said, it was on a track at one point to perhaps be a substitute. At this point in the proceedings, it can only be an amendment. And it's, as I said, it's primarily about background checks. There's also a commission to study video game violence and violence in the culture and entertainment. There are some other provisions, but it's primarily background checks. And there will be other amendments to deal with assault weapons, about straw purchases, about magazine size, and about mental health.
Charlton, Ama, Louisiana, Republican. Hi. Charlton?
Yeah, go ahead.
Please go ahead. We're listening, sir.
I was wondering why all of this stuff is just for guns and whatnot, and why not knives? There are 14 people stabbed at a university in Texas, and all the people that are run over and killed and everything else for drunks, people drinking, and why don't you do something to stop that? Why is it all directed at guns? It's very simple if you really use your mind to think of it, why the government is pushing so hard strictly for guns.
I've heard that argument quite a few times in the past couple of months. You know, the fact is Congress has enacted drunk driving legislation over the past 20 or 30 years, forcing states to raise the drinking age. At the state level, the blood alcohol content threshold is coming down in a lot of different states. So, you know, those are the issues the caller points out are issues, and they've also been dealt with legislatively.
Connecticut Senator Blumenthal, Democrat, is on the floor of the Senate, and he is talking about the gun control debate with regard to Newtown, Connecticut, and he's been showing photos of some of the victims there on the floor of the Senate. C-SPAN 2, if you'd like to watch that full debate. And again, in a little over an hour is when the cloture vote is scheduled to happen. Sue in Pekin, Illinois, Democrat. Please go ahead,
Achieving
Sue.
Hello?
We're listening.
Yes, sir. I guess I was just kind of listening to the people calling in about the gun control. I did notice that most of the ones that want no gun control at all seem to be white males. And all the guys doing the killing seem to be white males, upper class kind of community. I don't understand why. I see the mothers or the women calling in wanting some kind of legislation, but the males seem threatened by that for some reason. If our Constitution meant all, you know, what it meant for our forefathers, for all of its people of all of its time, we wouldn't have needed a Civil War or a Civil Rights Bill. So when somebody tells me about our Constitution, and I am a minority, I am Japanese and American, then I feel to myself that, you know, have y'all lost the history of your own country, of our country, knowing what it has been about from our forefathers? Because the Constitution didn't mean anything to a lot of people at all of its time. So I'm wondering why they keep bashing on this constitutional thing. You got the right to bear arms. We're just saying don't bear them with 600 rounds of ammunition.
Yeah, the caller at first there was connecting the dots between two now hot-button issues, and that is guns and race. The experience that she has with guns is very different from the experience that other Americans have with guns. It's a problem that perhaps needs a national solution rather than a patchwork. Guns easily move across state lines and from community to community. And so guns that are purchased in an area that respects gun rights can easily be moved to areas that have more of a skepticism about the violence and the chaos that they can bring. And there are going to be all sorts of issues of race and class and other issues that form kind of the worldview that people approach this issue with.
We have 5 minutes left in this morning's Journal. Then the House comes into session. We'll be going to that live. The Senate is in session about an hour from now. They'll be voting on the cloture to the gun bill debate. Gregory Cordy, if people want to read the Manchin-Toomey Schumer-Kirk bill, do you know where it is online?
Yeah, it's not much to read at this point. The last I've seen, there is a 3-page fact sheet that outlines some of the provisions. And unless something has happened this morning that I'm not aware of, the legislative language is still being worked through.
Okay, and we've shown that 3-page fact sheet here on the Washington Journal this morning. Lonnie in Messick, Michigan, Republican.
Yes, I've was listening to you, been listening to you this morning, and the guy that was on there before this one was talking. He was a Democrat, and he talked. He voted for that no bill, no pay. He voted against that because he didn't want to lose his pay in his first term. So I figure best thing you could do is to drop the straight ticket voting, have the people pay attention to who is running, and vote for the person that they feel is going to do the job. Because most of them, I feel, is in there just for the money and not for the people. And I'd like to know what could be done about that.
Any response for that caller, Mr. Corti?
I don't think there's much to say about that, no.
Rachel in Forney, Texas, Independent Line. Please go ahead.
Yes. As a child, my neighbor, he had a mental issue, and he shot at us when we were growing up. And we had to live next door to him. They never came in and got his guns. And I can't understand these people think their rights can be taken away, because all they're saying is a background check to make sure somebody does not have a gun that's crazy, and maybe a smaller clip, and then you hear my constitutional rights, whatever. I mean, they say that my sister-in-law believes there's going to be zombies going to attack the world. There has to be zombies to think that the rights is going to be taken away from them. And it says in the Constitution, the 4th chapter article, and it talks about changing the for violence. I just don't understand how people could still think that their guns can be taken away from them.
Oh, sorry, Rachel. I thought you were finished. Mr. Cordy?
Well, you know, the Second Amendment has its roots in a very different time, in a very young country that was a few short years away from what they saw as tyranny. And it was an amendment written in a different time, and this is the debate we're having, is how relevant is the Second Amendment in 2013, moving from this agrarian society to an industrial society, to really a post-industrial society. What does it mean to the right of the people to keep and bear arms?
And Right Wing tweets in, I have a carry permit. I should be able to carry in all states. And Tom Parks, and you can help us here a little bit, Mr. Cordy, if you would. So they are voting on cloture for a bill that doesn't exist yet. Could you, again, what's going to happen at 11 o'clock?
The bill does exist. It's Senate Bill 649. And you can go and you can look it up. As I said, it's really kind of a placeholder bill. It's a skeleton bill that is going to have amendments put onto it, but it does exist. It does have provisions.
This was the bill that the Senate Judiciary Committee voted out of committee,
yes.
Correct? Okay.
Correct. It includes the Obama language, more or less, on background checks. It does not include any language on an assault weapons ban. It has some mental health provisions. But there are going to be any number of amendments to that bill that we have, some that we know are coming. We have a vague idea what they're about. Very few do we have any exact language on, and some we don't even know that they're going to come yet. This is part of the legislative process, and it's kind of interesting. It's kind of a return to regular order in the Senate, where you have an open process and senators can debate it and bring their own views to the table.
And Annie Tin, our Capitol Hill producer for C-SPAN, says that Senator Reid said on the floor late Wednesday that the First Amendment that can be offered to the bill will be the Manchin-Toomey background check compromise. But at this point, we don't even know if there's going to be debate on the bill, correct?
Not until 11 o'clock, and we see that cloture vote.
And if 60 votes are achieved, then?
Then we have at least another 30 hours of debate, and we have any number of amendments, each with their own sub-debates. Now, it's always hard to predict with the Senate, because the Senate has, first of all, they have really arcane rules, but they're rules that can be waived at any time by unanimous consent. So one of the things to watch is whether that trio of filibustering senators, or those who have threatened to filibuster, will deny Harry Reid unanimous consent on any one of these smaller procedural issues that are going to come up, and try to drag this out as long as possible.
Gregory Cordy is with USA Today, a congressional reporter. Thank you, as always, for being on the Washington Journal.
That interview from earlier today was on some of the amendments to the firearms bill. The Senate went on this morning to vote 68-31 to move forward with debate on the gun control measure. The Hill says clearing the first of what's expected to be many 60-vote hurdles for the legislation. 16 Republicans voted in favor of the motion, while 2 Democrats, both from states President Obama lost in the 2012 election, voted against it. The 2 Democrats were Senators Mark Begich of Alaska and Mark Pryor of Arkansas, both of whom face re-election next year. Here's more about that deal between Senators Toomey and Manchin on their background checks amendment. They made the announcement at a press conference yesterday.
Good morning. I'm going to be covering up some people's phones here. I hope I don't. Well, let me just say good morning to all of you, and I'm very, very proud to be here with my good friend Pat Toomey from my sister state of Pennsylvania and West Virginia. We're side by side, and we come from states that have deep-rooted cultures, as you know, and we believe very strongly in that. I also want to give special thanks to 2 people who aren't here today, who have been invaluable to this process and have worked from the beginning trying to find common ground, and that is Senator Chuck Schumer, my good friend, and my dear friend Mark Kirk. Mark has been with me from the beginning and has never left, and Chuck and his staff and all of them who've worked so hard. I thank everybody, because as Pat will tell you, the staffs do yeoman's job. I also want to thank Tom Coburn. Tom has been invaluable to the process, also coming from the culture we come from, and has had great input all the way through this process. I want to make it clear from the start that this is a start, and it's not the end of our work. We still have a lot to do. We have an agreement, Pat and I have an agreement with Senator Kirk and Senator Schumer. We have an agreement on an amendment to prevent criminals and the mentally ill and insane from getting firearms and harming people. That's extremely important for all of us. Also, we agree that we need a commission on mass violence, and this commission is going to be made up with people with expertise. People who have expertise in guns, people who have expertise in mental illness, people who have expertise in school safety, and people who have expertise in video violence. We have a culture of violence, and we have a whole generation who basically has been desensitized. And if you go around and talk to the young people today, it just is what it is, and we've got to find out how we can change and reverse that. We also need to protect legal gun owners like myself and Pat, who basically cherish the Second Amendment rights that we have. And we have done that also. But today is just the start of a healthy debate that must end with the Senate and House hopefully passing these common sense measures and the President signing it into law. Back home where I come from, we have common sense, we have nonsense, and now we have gun sense. And that's what we're talking about. The events at Newtown, truly the events at Newtown changed us all. It changed our country, our communities, our towns, and it changed our hearts and minds. This amendment won't ease the pain. It will not ease the pain of the families who lost their children on that horrible day. But nobody here, and I mean not one of us, in this great capital of ours, with a good conscience, could sit by and not try to prevent a day like that from happening again. And I think that's what we're doing. Americans on both sides of the debate can and must find common ground. That's what Pat and I have been working on and what we've been able to do. Today's agreement is a first step in a common ground that all of us agree is crucial to keep guns out of dangerous hands and to keep our children safe. This is a bipartisan movement. It's a bipartisan amendment, and we all know that a bipartisan solution is a lasting solution. But nobody here in good conscience could sit by and not try to prevent a day that has happened at Newtown from ever happening again. I can't say enough about my friend Pat Toomey, and I just appreciate him so much for working as hard and his staff doing what they've done, and for us all coming together today. So with that, I'd like to introduce to you my dear friend Pat Toomey from the great state of Pennsylvania. Pat?
Thank you very much, Senator Manchin. I too want to commend Senator Manchin for the great work that he's put in for a long time on this. Our staffs have worked very hard as well, and I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure working for you. We're going to continue to work together, I hope, on many things. I also want to mention the terrific work that Senator Kirk has done on this. He's really been an invaluable asset and a very, very important voice in this discussion, and I appreciate that. Let me say, you know, Pennsylvania has a long bipartisan tradition of supporting gun rights, and I've been proud to be a part of that tradition, and I continue to be. I'm a gun owner, and the rights that are enshrined in the Second Amendment are very, very important to me personally, as I know they are to so many people across Pennsylvania. My record shows this. I've got to tell you candidly, I don't consider criminal background checks to be gun control. I think it's just common sense. If you pass a criminal background check, you get to buy a gun. It's no problem. It's the people who fail a criminal or a mental health background check that we don't want having guns. Now, in my time in public life, I've not taken a very high-profile role on this issue. I spend most of my time and energy focusing on policies that will help generate economic growth and job creation and put us on a sustainable fiscal path. That has been my focus. It will continue to be my focus. So let me explain to you why I'm standing here today with Senator Manchin. I'm here because over the last few months, several things became apparent to me. First is that gun legislation appeared destined to reach the Senate floor. It's not something that I sought, but it's something that I think is inevitable. Second thing is it became apparent that there are a number of gun control proposals that I think actually would infringe Second Amendment rights. And I will tell you categorically that nothing in our amendment prevents the ownership of guns by any lawful person, and I wouldn't support it if it did. But what also became apparent to me in the course of this debate, there was the danger that we might end up accomplishing nothing and not making progress where we could. So that's when I started talking with Senator Manchin and Senator Kirk and others to see if we might be able to find a place where there's some common ground. And I think we found it. And the common ground rests on a simple proposition, and that is that criminals and the dangerously mentally ill shouldn't have guns. I don't know anyone who disagrees with that premise, from either political party or whatever folks' views might be on broader gun rights issues. So if we start with the notion that dangerous criminals and dangerously mentally ill people shouldn't have guns, the question is, how can we accomplish that? Now, background checks are not a cure-all by any means, but they can be helpful. In the 10-year period from 1999 to 2009, 1.8 million gun sales were blocked by the current background check system because people were not qualified to own a gun. Now, I've supported background checks in the past. I support them now. They already exist, of course, for the purchase of guns from licensed dealers. In Pennsylvania, in fact, they already exist for all handgun purchases. if it passes, what our measure will do, it'll expand background checks to purchases of firearms at gun shows and over the